So a few things about the youth. I started out as a youth pastor here, although we didn't call it youth pastor. It was just working with the high school Sunday school class. I taught that Sunday school class, and then we had youth group on Tuesday night, and that was every Tuesday night. High school predominantly. And one of the things, I think the growth aspect, again, of this church has always been to reach out to the community. Still is. Our first youth groups were kids that weren't members of our church. We actually didn't have any kids in the church. But we had a great youth group, and there were churches all around, and we weren't trying to steal anybody's kids. It was just a community effort. So the kids came. For me, I was a young man myself. Pam and I were having our children, so our kids sort of grew up with a youth group. Every vacation we ever had for the first 20 years was a youth group trip somewhere, whether it was Current River, we went to Florida, we went to Six Flags more times than I care to count, Paoli skiing, snow skiing, all these different trips. But my, I'm going to say philosophy, but I just think people love to be involved, and the church ought to be a fun place. I'm thankful for this church because we've torn up a lot of things in youth ministry because we would play games, knee football or frisbee or of course baseball and basketball and things like that. And the church was willing to go along with that because the kids were coming in. And that was the key, and hopefully I think they still are. I mean, that's been youth ministry's changed tremendously from when I began. But just getting the kids together, playing some ping pong, having some. My goodness, Deanna Johnson made Rice Krispie treats for 10, 15 years solid every Tuesday because the kids loved them. And so we had a little food, we had a lot of fellowship, we had some Bible study and Bible lesson. We had a lot of fun. We did all kinds of weird things. I tend to be weird. I like weird things. We taped people to the wall in our fellowship hall. Still do sometimes. The youth kids, they love that. We brought mattresses over and had WWA, whatever, Worldwide Wrestling Federation, and we would just have some wrestling matches, controlled, but still a lot of fun, a lot of activity, a lot of interaction. And I can tell you today that kids come up to me. It happened to me just a few weeks ago. One young man who is now in his 40s said, "You remember when you taped me to the wall in youth group?" And we started reminiscing about all the things. So for me, youth group philosophy and youth group activities were just simply reach out to the community, help the kids find their place with Jesus, and then send them back to their other churches. If some didn't have a church, and Whittington at the time had a lot of young kids that didn't really have a church family, we became that for them. And again, I'm thankful that the church was willing to put up with a lot of things that they did. So that, and even today, our focus is on youth. If I look at our budget, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a very high percentage of our budget goes toward youth activities because that's the future, as they always say, but it really is true. So if you've watched any of the videos or anything about the history of the church, youth really has been a huge part. And thinking about some of the transitions, I started out, as I mentioned in one of the videos, as a youth pastor, and then ultimately to help me out, the church added 2 staff members, Greg Shelton and Ronnie Sink, but then shortly thereafter we added Bob Pankey. And part of Bob's job was to take over for me in the youth. He also led some worship, by the way. But and so we brought him on full time. And part of that, and I think this is God's timing, I think it speaks to the church as well. He was in the church, and he was about to take a teaching job when we interrupted that career with saying, "You need to lead our youth and become a pastor here at the church." And he did, and I'm so thankful for that. So Bob led the youth, and we sort of transitioned. He took over for me, and I'm thankful for that. Later on, we recognized that we needed to subdivide the youth, and so Becky Jones, we did interviews, and she was a successful candidate, and we hired her full-time as the leader of the children's church. So now we have a children's church director, we have a youth pastor. So that's kind of what has happened within the church and the growth. Even now, Bob Pankey has surrendered that title, I guess, to Gavin Suver, and that was a very similar thing where we approached Gavin, and he was at a career change point in his life, and I felt very strongly in the Lord that he was the one that should do that. Certainly brought it to the church. We prayed about it, but approached him, and now Gavin is leading our youth. But I think maybe that just speaks to the way, the very organic way that leadership has transitioned throughout our church life, and maybe that'll change in the years ahead, but it's sure worked well for us to this point, and I think the number of kids and lives that have been touched are evidence of that.